Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Income is the Outcome, where we believe it's not how much you earn, it's how much you keep that matters. I'm your host, Kristen Oakley, and joining me in the studio is the founder and president of the Whistler Agency, Tim Whistler. We've got a great show for you today. The title of today's show is The Great Wealth Transfer. And if you were born between the ages of 1946 and 1980, you especially are not going to want to miss today's show, because something known as the Great Wealth Transfer is underway. We're going to be unpacking what that is and what it means for you, because it's going to affect us all. Tim, my friend, great to be here with you again this week. How are you?
I'm well, Kristen. It's always good to be here with you as well.
Well, in addition to the television show and your radio show and meeting with folks and your live events, you also get to write an article in Experience Health magazine. His article comes out every other month. And actually, your article for a recent issue was all about this great wealth transfer.
Yes, it was.
Very exciting.
Yes, it is. Yeah, it's a great publication. It kind of resides around Central Illinois, and like in doctor offices and grocery stores, it's complimentary to pick up. And we have the privilege to be asked to provide some content about every other month.
Yes. So what was the inspiration for this article and this conversation around the Great Wealth Transfer? Why don't you explain what it actually is?
So this is going to be that massive shift of dollars from baby boomers to Gen X, and then so on down to millennials. And it's going to happen. They estimate it to be around $84 trillion, according to an article that was written just a couple of months ago.
Wow.
And it's going to pass along, over the next several years, probably even a couple of decades. So it's going to be a massive amount of money. It's going to transition from one generation to the next.
$84 trillion, trillion with a T. That is a lot of money. And so we need to talk about this. And I mean, who is it going to affect the most? Because there's kind of two sides to this coin, if you will, right?
It will. It's going to come down to obviously those generations, if you will. So for example, the baby boomers, born between 46 and 64. Then you go to the Gen X's. That's where I live.
Our generation. Yes, we're on. Yes.
We're at between 65 and 80. Those are the years of birth. And then you've got the millennials after that. So
right.
Gen X, it's hard to believe they're already starting to enter into that retirement red zone, that 10-year window. It's hard to believe that they're already starting to age into that process. So them having an idea of how this transfer is going to impact them and their income is very, very important for them to understand.
Yes, and so there's several implications that we're going to get into today regarding this great wealth transfer, and most importantly, what it means for you. But Tim, from your point of view, what is it about the great wealth transfer that matters so much?
If you stop and think about this for a second, there's going to be a massive amount of dollars, big picture, but it's also going to come down to families. So, for example, Gen Xers now are going to start inheriting dollars, and some of these dollars can be sizable. I think of right now of Tim and Janice. I'm sitting down with them. They're walking through this exact path right now, and it's sometimes this is an emotional process. I can speak very frankly from the loss of my mom back in the year 2000. The emotion, the loss, the void that's left behind. But then you add dollars behind that. This is a very emotional event for a lot of people. It's mom and dad are leaving you dollars, and it's the last dollars you'll probably ever receive from them. So we go through that process of the grief,
yes,
the grief of losing a parent, and thinking of the memories and all the wonderful times together. Now they leave dollars for you. Now we have to kind of incorporate a plan on how we properly leverage and utilize those dollars that were so lovingly left behind for us.
Yes, and so you said you're working with someone who's going through this process right now, right?
Exactly. Tim and Janice came into the office not too long ago, and we formed a friendship. They actually attended one of the Baby Boomer Dilemma movies that we've sponsored for folks, and the conversation just started to unfold. And then all of a sudden, I get the conversation with Tim that his dad had just passed. And between Tim and his siblings, Dad left them some dollars. Some dollars were inside of an inherited IRA or traditional IRA account that his dad owned, and some dollars were in a brokerage account. So we've been now talking with Tim and Janice about, what do these dollars mean to you? How do you want to leverage those dollars? And let's obviously keep you compliant with the IRS and how RMDs affect those inherited IRA dollars.
Yeah, well, clearly there's so many considerations to think through with this great wealth transfer, and we're going to get into a lot of those today. But obviously, this is something that can be very emotional, to your point. You've lived through it from a firsthand experience. What would you say to someone who's watching going, gosh, I hadn't even thought about this? Because really you could be the person who's passing on the wealth in the baby boomer generation, or you could be the son or the daughter or family member or loved one who's going to be inheriting the wealth. And that means that there's different things that both parties really need to think through. So what would you say to someone who's going, yeah, I need help figuring this out? Yeah, and I think, first of all, don't feel as though you're alone, because I think this is going to affect a lot of families. And again, we don't know what we don't know. So, there's just a lot of moving parts to it. So our approach is to simply say, let's have the conversation. What do these dollars mean to you? How do you want to pass them on to the next generation? Sometimes people have a very specific dollar amount they want to leave behind. Some others just say that we're going to leave behind whatever's left over. That's perfectly fine. We've got a plan. Let's talk through it, and let's create the most tax-efficient transition that we can as possible. Yes, and I know we're going to get a lot more into the tax efficiency of this great wealth transfer as well. But if this is resonating with you, if you want help knowing how you and your family can successfully navigate this great wealth transfer for yourselves, we invite you to reach out and connect with Tim and the team of Whistler Agency to claim your very own complimentary written financial plan. That number to call is 888-992-7829. Or if you'd rather connect online, if you simply pull out your smartphone, you can open up that camera app, just point, click, and scan that QR code that you see there down in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. That will take you over to a landing page, ask you a few short, simple questions, and then a member of the team from the Whistler Agency will reach out to connect with you to schedule your complimentary meeting that way as well. Stay with us. We've got a lot more to cover regarding the great wealth transfer and what it means for you right after this. What kind of led me into this business was the year 2000. Within a span of 4 months, we went from a moment of just pure jubilation to just a horrible situation, from the birth of our firstborn to the death of my mother 4 months after that, and she was 52. And I was only 31 at the time. And here, Cameron's not even 4 months old. My mom's now passed away. You really start to reflect on what life is all about. Deep down, I always kind of wanted to run my own business at some form or fashion, but I didn't know what that entailed. But it became very apparent when I saw what my father went through financially after the death of my mother. One of the most smartest guys I've ever known. But just like with most people, finances was a foreign language to him. And he somewhat got taken advantage of by an advisor. So that was the moment where I knew this is what I wanted to do, because I didn't want to just make a living, I wanted to make a difference. My mom has never seen my logo. She's never heard me on a podcast. She's never seen me do a presentation, but she's the fuel that fills my passion for this industry, because of the fact that I miss her terribly even today, almost 23 years. It was what I saw my dad go through that inspires me to say, okay, if that happens to somebody else, as long as I can have that conversation ahead of time, hopefully then they won't experience what my dad went through. And that's what ultimately led me into the business. And I feel as though this is where God led me, and I love being here. And as long as he continues to bless me of sound mind and body, this is what I'll do for the rest of my days. Welcome back to Income is the Outcome. I'm Kristen Oakley here with the founder and president of the Whistler Agency, Tim Whistler. And today we are discussing the great wealth transfer, the fact that it's estimated that $84 trillion is going to pass from the baby boomer generation on down. And whether you're the one who wants to pass on this wealth to your loved ones, or you're the one who's going to be inheriting that wealth, there's unique considerations that both parties involved need to be thinking through and really planning for. And Tim, again, this was a subject of a recent article that you got to write. You write every other month for Experience Health magazine. And here, I'll pull it up for you. There it is, The Great Wealth Transfer. So this is a great read. If folks can pick it up in the area, they would love to read it as well, right? That's exactly right. They can go around the area, and it's a complimentary magazine. They can pick it up and read it to their heart's content. Wonderful. Well, we were sharing, and I appreciate, too, that you come at this from having gone through it yourself with the early passing of your mom back in the year 2000. But when folks come in to meet with you to discuss this whole concept of passing on wealth, legacy planning, estate planning, what do you typically find are the most common concerns or questions that they have? I think a lot of folks start thinking about the IRS, which is a good thing. Unfortunately, the IRS does play a role. So, a common question is, well, how much is the IRS going to take? Can I reduce the amount that the IRS is going to take? Are there any tax-free options available to us? I think those are probably the most common questions we hear folks as they start that conversation about transitioning that wealth down, because I think at the end of the day, Kristen, most people are looking to leave that legacy. Everyone's going to leave that legacy, and some people have a very specific, thought process as far as
what that legacy wants to look like. So I think they want to do it in the most proactive manner, which I completely agree with.
Right.
And let's leave more to the family than more to the IRS per se.
Right.
And let's have that conversations, because I know it matters to people when we start leaving dollars to the kids from mom and dad and maybe aunts and uncles and maybe grandparents.
So what are the most important steps, rather, that folks can take if they want to make sure that they have this solid plan in place? And I know we'll get more into the tax efficiency as we go on throughout today's show, but on a big picture level, what's the most important thing that folks need to do to make this legacy plan happen? You know,
I think it really boils down to just two key aspects: organization and communication. Not that that's easy, it's simple, but sometimes it involves a task involved. So I just think, you know, from an organizational standpoint, let's have the conversation. So if I'm talking to you at home and you're thinking about, okay, we do have some dollars that we want to pass on to our kids, our grandkids. Okay, let's talk through that. What does that mean to you? How do you want to transition those dollars? How is the IRS going to get involved with that? And then second thing is communication. You know, there is nothing that'll divide a family more quickly than money. It's an unfortunate thing, and I've seen it happen, unfortunately, you know, outside of the world that I live in. Just, you know, articles that you read or stories that you hear.
Yep.
I think close to home, one of my cousins' husband was raised in a farm family, and it was him and his two sisters. And so my cousin Steve and his father farms together. And unfortunately, there was not a plan in place set by Steve's dad, and he unexpectedly passed away, and all of a sudden, you know, there's money on the table. And to pass that farm value from one family to the next requires a plan. There was no plan. The farm had to be sold.
Wow.
And I know for a fact, having never met, I don't think I ever met Steve's dad, but I know for a fact that was not his plan. And so
that was not his wishes, rather.
It was not his wishes.
Right.
So, you know, organization and communication. Let's talk through the plan together, both with mom and dad and the kids who are involved in that transition.
I know I've heard in my work as a financial educator that often one of the reasons why folks put off these conversations, one, it's never fun to think about when we're not going to be here, right? But none of us are promised tomorrow.
Right.
And it's by far one of the most loving things that you can ever do for those you leave behind. Because when someone's grieving, that's not the time on top of everything else that you want to have to wade through a nightmare or a mess that's been left in your lap or the lack of a plan. And like you said, have these unintended, you know, consequences. But I know that one reason also why folks procrastinate is they're like, oh, well, I'll do that after I get organized. So how do you help folks if they're not organized? If they come to you and they're like, we have no idea what we're doing, how does the conversation go from there? So
we'll kind of start at the foundation, if you will, kind of go back to point A. All right, number one, let's talk about the dollars in the portfolio. Because when we have that get acquainted conversation with folks, we go through that, and I'm not only looking at statements, I'm also asking the questions about what's behind the dollars? What does these dollars mean to you? And I always come to that part of the conversation of, okay, let's talk about your legacy. What are your thoughts as far as the legacy goes? And again, some people are like, whatever's left behind. That's fine. That's the plan that we'll craft. But even so, there can still be a plan for whatever's left behind. Or some people have maybe a specific dollar amount that they've left behind. You know, I think of John and Isabel, the clients that came in. Both are doing very well financially for themselves, and they've got 2 children, and they've got a certain dollar amount that they want to leave behind for the kids. So we walk through that process because that might be a little bit different for them than maybe another household. So if they're not really sure how to be organized or how to start, we'll help them get started by asking those questions, get the thoughts, get the juices flowing a little bit, and then we'll start that conversation and put those thoughts into a written plan. Yeah, and I think, for folks, that can help remove the overwhelm because it can feel very daunting. Absolutely. But I find a lot of folks spend a lot more time worrying and stressing about this when rather if you could just take that first action step, it will come together for you. That's exactly right. I think it shocks them like, wait, this wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. And that's why we're here. We think in terms of us being the country of Switzerland. We're very neutral. We're waving the Switzerland flag. We don't have any vested interest in those dollars. We're just simply here to kind of help facilitate, maybe mentor that conversation. So that way it's not as daunting, maybe uncomfortable of a conversation because again, unfortunately, it's going to happen at some point. Right. But let's go into that situation with a plan in place. For sure. And that's how we can help make that process a little bit smoother. I think it's also important to address one of the biggest misconceptions
I'm sure you've heard this as well. I've heard a lot of folks say, well, I don't have enough money to need an estate plan. I don't need one. That's only for really, really wealthy folks. What would you say to someone who has that belief?
You know, it's a very, very interesting, thought, because we do come across those folks every now and then. And I think a lot of people just say, to your point, they might say those exact words to me, and then they'll say, but I don't want to leave any debt. I think that's a big one as well. They don't want to leave anything. They don't want to be a burden to their family.
Sure.
That's fine. We'll talk through that. How can we make sure that that happens? So if there's not a specific dollar amount that they maybe are able to or want to leave behind, but they don't want to leave debt behind, okay, let's talk through that and make sure that gets handled as well prior to that event happening.
Well, and I know being in Central Illinois, there's a lot of land issues as well, like
Yes,
that example you shared. So that needs to be planned for.
That's exactly right. And in fact, I've got a great partnership with the company everybody's heard of, Nationwide. Nationwide has a plan in place, a specific program for farm families. It's called Land as Your Legacy. And I have the benefit of being one of the advisors in that program, where we can sit down with a farm family and lay this thing out. And Kristen, this is one of the most detailed plans I've ever seen, because it's set up by people at Nationwide who are farm family members. They are preaching and sharing what they have already experienced or about to experience.
Yes.
And it is a powerful thing. So again, if you're in that farm family situation and you're like, okay, we want to make this as smooth as possible from mom and dad to the kids, we don't really know where to start, or maybe we want a second opinion on how to do this. We'll walk them through, and we will work with their current estate planning attorneys and current CPAs just to make sure that everything is lined up and everything falls right into place when that transition needs to occur.
I'm so glad that families here in Central Illinois and beyond, I know you work with a lot of folks throughout, but they have the opportunity to have you in their corner to help them walk through this, because it can be very daunting, but you help remove that overwhelm and help them put all these pieces together so that their wishes can be carried out.
Absolutely, and it all starts with a conversation. That's where we're here. We have that acquainted conversation, start to unpack all the different details, and then we go a little bit further as far as what do these numbers mean to you, what's your plan for income, and what's the plan for the legacy. We're here to help. We'd love to sit down and talk through that with you.
Wonderful. Well, I'm excited for more folks to get to connect with you as a result of today's show. So if that's you, again, this is for no cost, no charge, no obligation. It's simply an invitation to have a conversation to see how Tim and the team of the Whistler Agency can help and serve you. You might have questions outside of this estate planning conversation today. They'd love to be able to help you with those as well. Again, we invite you to pick up the phone, call that number on the bottom of your screen, 888-992-7829, to claim your very own complimentary written financial plan. Or again, you're also welcome to connect online by scanning that QR code, and that will get you connected as well. We'll be back with more on this conversation regarding the great wealth transfer and how you can make sure that you pass on your wealth in the most tax-efficient manner right after this.
So we're based out of Peoria, Illinois. I literally just opened this office literally about a month ago, because the last 6 years I've been working out of my home office. And that was for just family reasons. My wife and I have 2 sons, and they're now starting to get to that age where they're about ready to fly the coop. So it's just good to be with them for these last few years. We are on the main level of a 3-story professional office building. So as soon as they enter through the large double doors, they immediately turn to their left, and there's the entrance to the Whistler Agency. So we're very easily accessible for people, right off the street. You park in the parking lot, walk the sidewalk, you come in the door, and you're right there. And when they come in, there'll be a couple little seats there in the small little entryway, if you will. Most people aren't really waiting to get to me. I'm not like a doctor's office or anything like that. But then we've got a little receptionist area, and then I walk them through our conference room. The conference room table is actually a dining room table for my grandmother. I just bring a little bit of the element of family in my practice, and just kind of have our conversation right there. Imagine not having to face your retirement journey with the same old corporate solutions as everyone else. In these economic times, you deserve a fresh perspective that includes a personalized income plan and tax strategy from an independent fiduciary advisor whose focus is on you. Call now to schedule your complimentary review.
Welcome back to Income is the Outcome, where today we are discussing the great wealth transfer, the fact that $84 trillion is estimated to pass from the baby boomer generation on down, and what it means for you. Again, this was the subject of Tim's latest article in this magazine, Experience Health. Right there it is, the great wealth transfer. So such an important conversation. That's why we wanted to have it on the TV show as well. Before the break, I mentioned the importance of making sure that this wealth is transferred in the most tax-efficient manner possible. We have to talk about that. That's one of the biggest risks with this great wealth transfer, right?
That's exactly right, because more times than not, when people are following the rules, the majority of clients' assets are held in tax-deferred accounts. And if you're watching the show and you're thinking about your traditional IRA, pre-tax 401k, 403b, whatever tax-deferred account you may have, when you transition those dollars, not between spouses, but from mom and dad down to the kids, the IRS will leach themselves right onto that same account. Therefore, when they inherit those dollars, we want to make sure that we leave those dollars behind in the most tax-efficient manner possible.
So what steps can baby boomers be taking even now to make sure that they help diffuse, if you will, this tax bomb that they could be passing off to their loved ones? One of the things that we can talk about is if we're not quite to RMD ages yet, and that was a fun show that Chris and I did recently. We talked about RMDs. Don't try this at home. Be sure to watch that show because we unpacked a lot. But if we kind of hit the top of the iceberg here, tip of the iceberg, we'll talk about, if you're not quite to RMD age Which
yet.
Is required minimum distributions,
yes,
right?
Thank you.
Yes.
Required minimum distributions. That's right. So many acronyms.
I know, yes.
But, if we're not quite to that age yet, what we can do is we can talk about some proactive planning, not just for mom and dad's income for retirement, but if we do some proactive planning and maybe get the IRS out of the equation a little bit sooner, those dollars can be passed down to the next generation a little more tax efficiently. So, for example, one of the documents that I have being a part of Ed Slott's Elite IRA Advisor Group is a little bit of a Shakespearean feel to it. To convert or not to convert in 5 easy steps. So that's one of the things that we do. We walk that conversation, walk those clients through that conversation and talk about, when do you need the money? Where will the money to come from to pay the taxes? What do you think the future tax rates will be? We'll go through those different types of details. So therefore, if there's dollars that we want to leave behind to the kids, we're going to go through the process of how is the IRS going to be involved with that transition.
Right.
And because again, if we can maybe be a little more proactive on that plan, hopefully we can reduce that overall liability that those kids will pay when they inherit those dollars from those tax-deferred accounts.
Right, because I think if folks know that there's a way to pass this on, I've heard it all over the gamut of, well, I don't really care, I'm going to be dead, right? Like they get the money, they can deal with my tax problem. But I think most people want to set their kids up for success. In this example, if you're passing on money to that younger generation, and there's steps that can be taken even now to help make sure that they're not paying any more in taxes than they would need to, because not only would they need to pay tax on that money, but often when you're inheriting that money, you're in your higher working years, which means that could easily bump your kids up into a higher tax bracket, and now they're burdened with even more tax unnecessarily.
That's exactly right. And I think right now of a story that comes to mind of a couple that I'm working with John and Penny. Fantastic people, so enjoy working with them and talking with them and interacting with them. And again, the process that we've walked John and Penny through is, again, transitioning all those dollars from tax-deferred accounts, 401ks, creating income from them, but also, too, they wanted to kind of have a plan in place for their kids and leave some dollars behind for them. So we're kind of utilizing a couple different tax-free buckets. One of them is we're going through a Roth conversion of using part of John's tax-deferred dollars.
Okay.
And then we're utilizing, we talked about this on a previous show, that at tax code 7702, utilizing a cash value life insurance policy. So therefore, it's kind of a twofold type of a product. Number one, it's going to be able to provide John and Penny with some tax-free income years down the road. But if all of a sudden something happens unexpectedly or prior to that, those dollars get passed on to the kids. And then those dollars, when they're passed out through life insurance, they're tax-free.
Yeah,
So
and a lot of people aren't aware of that. That's even an option for them.
That's exactly right. So we walk them through that. So once we have that conversation about the dollars that we want to leave behind, my job then is to say, okay, how can we possibly do this in the most tax-efficient manner, knowing full well that the IRS is going to play a role in some of those dollars.
Right, yeah. Well, it's interesting, this 7702 plan, we know that a lot of people in our government higher up, I think the stats are 90% of U.S. senators and 85% of Congress people and most presidents have had a 7702 plan, and yet most Americans have never even heard of it or know how it works. So this is important because it is a strategy. It's legal in the tax code that allows people to pass on tax-free income. That's huge. It
is. And I spoke about John and Isabel earlier and wanting to leave some kids, some dollars behind for their children. And, one of the ways you can do that is, again, without going too deep into the details, you actually can craft a specific cash value life insurance policy called a second to die life policy. In other words, it insures 2 lives. So if mom and dad have a specific dollar amount in mind they want to leave for the kids, maybe because it's going to have to cover some type of tax liability or some type of estate plan, whatever the case is, we can craft a plan that includes mom and dad together. So nothing's paid out while at least one of them is still alive. So it's a little bit less expensive to utilize that type of product because you're insuring 2 lives instead of just 1.
Right.
But then once the second of mom and dad has passed away, now here comes the tax-free dollars and goes directly to the children involved. And I tell you what, being able to set that up for folks, it's when they can see the value that brings, that plan brings, that's when it gets really, really real. And that's an exciting part for us because we get to play just a small role in that, but to be a part of that family and how that legacy matters to them and doing it again in the most tax efficient manner because, again, at the end of the day, nobody wants to be a burden to their kids.
Right.
And if we leave tax-deferred dollars behind, it's okay. Some people just have to do that, but we want to do it in the most tax efficient manner because, unfortunately, if you don't have a plan, the IRS will set up one for you, and it won't be in your best interest.
Yep.
So that's why we just encourage folks, let's have the conversation.
Yes.
Let's talk about it.
Yep.
Let's look at how the dollars are allocated, where are the buckets of money, where they reside, what's the tax classification, and if there's a specific plan in place. Kids, grandkids, non-for-profits. We talked a little bit about QCDs.
Right.
You can leave a legacy to those non-for-profit entities who really rely upon the generosity of folks, blessing their church, blessing a non-for-profit. I think of Peoria. In Peoria, Illinois, the Christian Center. Working with Phil and Chad and the staff there, they're great people. They have a fantastic ministry that reaches out to children with different sports programs. And we love working with them. So we encourage folks to think about how the type of legacy you want to leave behind, and let's do it in the most tax efficient manner.
Well, we've talked a lot about what baby boomers need to be aware of. In the last minute of the show, what would you say to people in our generation, Gen X, who are on the cusp of potentially, inheriting this great wealth transfer and maybe are scared to have that conversation with their parents? How could you help facilitate that?
And you brought up a good point. This conversation is not fun. It can be awkward, and sometimes, when I'm engaging with clients, I'll ask them, hey, what's the family dynamic when you're talking about money? Are you wide open and transparent, or are you like, no, hush, hush? That's fine. But for the Gen Xers, let's just be aware that if you're not really too sure of how the inheritance may come to you, let's have the conversation to understand about, okay, if mom and dad leave you dollars that have never been taxed, guess what? The IRS is going to be a silent partner in those dollars. And so we can talk through that process and just being aware of what might be coming down the road.
Right, and I know that you have lovingly been able to help families navigate this conversation successfully. So this is what you do day in and day out for folks.
We're here. We'd love to talk with you as well.
Wonderful. Tim, thank you so much. And thank you for joining us. We hope you found this to be helpful and valuable. That's how it's intended each and every week. We know that today's show might brought more questions to mind. Well, guess what? The best way to get them answered is going to be able to come in and sit down one-on-one, again, completely complimentary to you, and receive your complimentary written financial plan from Tim and the team of the Whistler Agency. That number to call to claim yours is 888-992-7829. Be safe, be happy, be blessed, and we look forward to being back with you next time here on Income is the Outcome.